Welcome to Beneath the Wing. Just like air passing over the wing of an aircraft provides lift, the people we meet can also give us lift in life by sharing their stories of strength and success, connecting us all. Beneath the Wing explores the stories of those connected with the Minnesota Air National Guard's 133rd Airlift Wing with a little humor and learning along the way. I'm your host, Wing Command Chief Mark Legvold.
Joining me today on Beneath the Wing is one of our distinguished retirees. After a career both active duty Air Force and our Air National Guard base here in St. Paul, Minnesota, Sheila Jessen retired and moved into a new civilian occupation. In fact, a couple. She's currently employed by Cargill Corporation as their military sorcerer. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Sheila.
Thank you, Mark.
It's great to have you here. You started out during a really awesome time in our country's history, right in the middle of the Cold War, and you had a pretty cool job. What was your first job in the Air Force?
So I joined the military 10 days after my 18th birthday. I was in a small town in Wisconsin, and I just knew I had to get out. So I found that the military, joining the Air Force, was going to be my path to getting out of town. And originally I joined to be a jet engine mechanic, as that was my guaranteed job going into active duty. And then in basic training, they gave me a test. Everybody gets the D-Lab test to see if you have an aptitude for languages. And I scored high. They pulled me aside and said, "Hey, do you want to be a linguist?" And I'm like, "Sure, I don't know what that is, but it sounds good." And they said you can learn a foreign language and travel all over the world. And I thought, well, that sounds more interesting than having grease under my fingernails and the working on aircraft. So I thought, okay, I'll do it. So then they assign you your language. And back then that was the Cold War, so Russian was the primary language. So I requested and I got assigned Russian. And then I spent my first year and a half learning Russian and going through a 6-month spy school.
Wow.
In Texas.
So did you have a second language when you joined the Air Force initially? Like, did you take high school Latin or something?
I took French in middle school.
Okay.
And they say that if you attempt learning a language when you're younger, it makes your brain more flexible. And so I think that did help me score well on that test and do well in the Russian language school.
Okay, so the first basically 2.5 years of your career, you were in training?
It was about a year and a half.
Year and a half?
Yep.
And then where did you go?
And then I went to Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska. So that was quite a switch. Very interesting to be able to live in Alaska for a couple of years. And that was an airborne reconnaissance unit. And so we flew specialized cargo planes along the borders of Russia collecting data.
And you were up there listening?
I wasn't allowed to fly because women weren't allowed to fly back then. It was deemed a combat mission. And so I was one of the first 3 women assigned there to do the groundwork, to translate everything after they brought the information back.
So basically the plane would fly along the border, record a bunch of stuff, and then you sat someplace nice.
Decipher it.
Oh my goodness. How many hours of listening and translating did you have on an average flight?
Well, the flights were very long. They would fly, 16, 18, 20-hour missions. And so a lot of data coming back. And we had a whole team that was, even the people who flew would come back and do some of the work, the groundwork. And so it was a lot of work.
A lot of work,
yeah.
I'm sure.
Working shift work, yep.
Eventually, were you able to fly? Did they change the rules?
So they were starting to, so this was in the early 80s. They did change the rules at right around the mid to late 80s, and I was offered the AWACS to go down to Eielson. AWACS is the Airborne Warning and Control or something like that. I don't know exactly what it stands for, but it's the plane with the big black and white circling dome on top. Mm-hmm. And they were going to send me to Elmendorf for that, or I could go back to Monterey and go to intermediate Russian. And I was
Monterey,
like,
California,
yeah,
or Alaska.
I was like, more Alaska or California. I'm like, I'll take California.
Good call.
Choose door number 2. Yeah. So then after that, they sent me to Berlin, and that was the bulk of my Russian language career was in Berlin, Germany. I spent 6 years there, and I was there during the time that the wall came down. So that was really interesting.
What was interesting about? I mean, you and I were alive when I watched that on TV because I was just graduating high school that year. And I mean, to me, that was so much of growing up was that Cold War mentality, and that wall signified more than just a barrier between East and West Germany. It signified kind of a barrier between people and cultures. what was it like being there? I mean, could you feel that sense
Oh
of?
my gosh, yeah. I wrote a letter to my family that year because it happened in November, and I wrote a Christmas letter. It was my first one ever, and people took it to their local newspapers and had it published around the Midwest because it was really heartfelt. But I think, when I got stationed in Berlin, they to give you a tour. They have like a newcomer's orientation tour, and they take you to the wall and they tell you the history, and you go into the Reichstag, and in the Reichstag there was a room that was all glass tables because in German there's a phrase about something shady is like under the table. So they want a glass table so that nothing could be under the table. You couldn't hide anything. So when they described that, that was going to be where they had the future unification discussions. And the wall had been built in 1961. I was born in 1962, so it was my whole life. And I thought, well, that's never going to happen. Like the wall's never going to come down because my whole life it's been there. And so then when the wall did fall, it was like hard to believe. But I felt like in my letter I said, we don't know what it's like to be divided like that. Imagine one day a wall comes up and half your family's on one side and the other half's on the other side, and you've been separated for 30 plus years. Like, we don't know how good we have it. We take things for granted. I'd been to East Berlin and saw how drab and dreary it was and the quality of life they had there. And just right on the other side of the wall is like a sparkling Berlin. And just like asking everybody at Christmas was just take some time and be grateful for what you have and the freedoms that you have, because this country didn't have it for so long, and now they're getting to taste it again. Yeah.
What an amazing thing. Published author. If I would have known, I would have introduced you a little differently.
I'll have to send you the article.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I would love to read that. So you stuck with active duty for another couple of years after the wall came down and left active duty in 91. Am I getting that right?
Actually left active duty in 88, but I stayed in Berlin and I got a defense contractor job. So I ended up staying in Berlin until after 91. And when the wall came down, my job was, kind of doing some spy work around the Russians. And when they all went home, my job kind of evaporated. So then I came back to the U.S.
Can I call you a spy?
I'm a retired spy.
It sounds so cool. So retired spy.
Yeah.
But you left Germany.
Yes.
Kind of right there at that tipping point in a military career where you're right around that 9-10 years, might as well make it a career, maybe I shouldn't. What was your decision point? Why didn't you stick it out at that point with the active duty side?
So when I got out in 88, I was having a lot of nowadays they call it a quarter life crisis because it was in my late 20s. But I was wondering, what is my skill sets going towards? So during the time I was in Berlin, the U.S. had been invading Panama and invading Guatemala or Grenada, and we were doing some really, I think maybe that was during the first Iraq War too, I can't remember. But anyway, the Germans were really outraged and they were calling us murderers. So I remember I was running on the base, there was a road around the flight line in Berlin, and there was a giant fence around it, and I was a chain link fence, and I was running inside the fence, and the Germans on their side of the fence were screaming at me, calling me a murderer, and I was like, I didn't murder anything. But then I'm like, wait a second, I am part of this military-industrial complex, and I was starting to have second thoughts about I know that what we do is important and has to be done, but do I want my talents to be supporting that or not? So I went to my art professor, and I'm like, I'm having all these questions, and she told me, you're having a midlife crisis, which she was dead on. And so that was what made me decide, for the rest of my career, maybe I want to put my energies into something that I could, believe in. So I was just having that, why am I here moment, right? So that's why I got out.
So belief kind of drove you to make that decision. Went back to Wisconsin?
Came back to Wisconsin briefly, but then I landed in the Twin Cities. And then I faced what a lot of veterans face is when they get out of the military, they come back home and they don't know anybody. And then it's like trying to build a whole new community around yourself and find a job when you don't know anybody. So I faced a lot of those initial transition problems that a lot of veterans face even today. Yeah.
When you came back to I guess eventually the Twin Cities area here, you had that break in service, but then you landed back in uniform. What brought you back? that sense of community?
So I never really found my niche. I would get a job as a female veteran. I wasn't taken seriously. My work experience wasn't valued. I was turned down for jobs that should have been an easy, hire. So I ended up doing administrative type work, and just like every 2 years I'd get bored and I'd get a different job. And so then I realized that, I kind of missed that camaraderie. I missed the military, the aspect, And so when I looked at going back in, I met a recruiter at the state fair, an Army Guard recruiter. And so Clayton was his name. So he said, hey, you want to join the Army Guard? I'm like, well, what I really want to do is be a recruiter, because I felt like I got a lot out of the military. And I'm like, maybe I could give that back by helping other people make that decision, right? Because I got my education out of the military. I got to travel, see the world. I was doing something important. And so I'm like, maybe I can help other people find that path too. And so I ended up as a recruiter in the Army Guard for a couple of years. I joined in 1998. They gave me a chance. And then I was like, wait, what am I doing in green? So then the Air Guard had an opening over here. So then I landed here in 2000.
Was it one of the questions that I've asked on the podcast here is, are we getting it right? And when it comes to how this degree of equality in opportunity for women versus men, especially during that time, you're saying that in the civilian sector it just wasn't recognized. I mean, you're a Russian linguist and a retired spy. And you're taking administrative positions that, I mean, to me, that sounds absolutely ridiculous in this day and age. And then you came back to the military. Why? Because there was better opportunity for you?
Yeah, part of it was just missing it, right? Like
Sure.
It had been part of my formative years, and I kind of missed it. And I also, because I wasn't finding my path in the civilian world, and I felt like I was just treading water, like not getting anywhere. I think one of my key moments when I was in that transition, when I got out in 91 and came back here, I applied for a technical writer position. I hired a headhunter to help me find the right role. And he said, this is a great role for you, and this is a great company. And when I interviewed, I had a great interview with the engineers. It was at a medical device company. And then the HR lady called him and said, she's lying, because there's no way she did all the things that she said she did. So I probably looked like I was 19, because I was really youthful looking, but I'd been in the military for 10 or 11 years with, working with the government. But she didn't believe anything that I was on my resume or what, I had said I did. And rather than just like saying, well, screw that company, I'm going to go find something else, I just gave up. I thought, well, that door is closed. And I wonder sometimes, would I have made that decision if I'd been a male? Would I have just gone, I'll apply again somewhere else? But I just didn't. I don't know why. I wonder, why did I take that no as like, no, this is not the path for you at all, instead of just like finding another application,
So now you've made that transition after retiring successfully out of the military and having a brilliant and successful career out here. You went back to the civilian sector. Is it better?
I think it's better. I think there's a lot more support now for hiring veterans. And I think women veterans still have a little bit more of an uphill battle internally and externally. But I think it's way better than it was when I transitioned out the first time.
Understood. Still a ways to go, right? But you talk about that internal struggle, and I want to get into that a little bit more. When you got out, having gone through this, I cannot imagine the feeling when somebody accuses you of lying about something that you've poured your heart and soul into for so long. I mean, to me, that just sounds painful. Did that memory come back when you retired and you were out looking for a new job? Did that motivate you in one way, or did it discourage you in one way? How did that experience shape your transition into the civilian sector the second go around?
I don't think it impacted me as much, because I'm older and more confident in myself than I probably was back then. It's kind of like that story has resurfaced now that I'm helping veterans a lot now, especially women veterans, and sharing that story to say, hey, if you get a door shut on you, don't take it like that's over. Just be persistent, be resilient, right? And keep trying. And so a lot of times when I'm talking to veterans and I'm looking at women veterans on LinkedIn perhaps, and I'll see the person is getting out as an E6 or an E7, and they're applying for administrative assistant jobs, or I can see that their LinkedIn profile is aiming towards that, or maybe they've gotten a job doing that already. And I'm like, girl, you need to like aim higher. And so I'm kind of coaching the women to say, hey, yeah, you can do that, but what is that what you want to do? You know, and maybe you do, maybe that, and that's okay. Nothing wrong with it. I have a male veteran I was working with just this month, and I think he was an E8 or an E9 out somewhere else in the country. And he just emailed me on LinkedIn yesterday and said, hey, never mind about the job search. He was working with Hiring Your Heroes to get a internship somewhere. And he's like, I got a truck driver job, and I'm going to work from 8:30 to 12:30. I'm going to spend the rest of the day with my family, and I'm really excited about it. Like, so a totally no pressure, no stress job, and he can spend more time off and kind of be semi-retired. And I'm like, good for him. Like, he doesn't have to go land another corporate job when you get out. So it's really a personal choice. But I also think women need to own their accomplishments and own their value and find those roles, because the men are doing it, so we should be doing it too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And giving that good hard look and saying, you know, wow, the military gives so many good opportunities to people regardless of where they start out in life. You know, small town in Wisconsin, or I had a guest on that grew up in south side of Chicago and was already accomplished in his civilian career and then decided to join the military. I mean, anyone from any facet in life can get some of those really good skills. I mean, can become a spy. How awesome is that, right? So now you're recruiting for Cargill. Is it a recruiter job?
Yeah, so even when I was applying for it and interviewing for it, I was confused because they were using this word called sorcerer, and I didn't really quite know what that meant, but I thought, well, it must be like a fancy word for a recruiter.
Okay, for just in case, I want to make sure we're clear. It's not sorcerer
right,
for Cargill. Pointy hat and like a witch's wand.
Sorcerer.
Sorcerer, okay.
Yeah. And so what a sorcerer does in corporate America is they are like internal headhunters. And so they're searching for talent. They're doing the outreach piece. The recruiters do the full cycle recruiting, where they post the job, they interview the candidates, they recommend them to the hiring manager, then they make the offer. But the sorcerer's kind of like outside of that, and they're just like, the recruiter might say, hey, I have a really hard position to fill. Can you go and find me some people? So we go out on LinkedIn and try to like attract talent and say, hey, we got this great opportunity. Would you be interested in talking to me about it? So we're kind of like, you know, warming them up, getting them interested. And so I specifically work on military and veteran sourcing, so trying to get more people into the pipeline for Cargill who are military veterans.
Are you the only person that specializes in finding military leads for Cargill?
I am.
Okay, that's a lot. Yeah. I mean, it's a big military,
big company,
and it's a big company.
Yeah,
that's a lot of responsibility, which I think is requisite with your resume, right?
Well, and you can't boil the ocean, right? And so it's like you can only do what you can do. There's this little story I've heard about, like seeing somebody on this beach, and there's all these starfish that have gotten stranded on the beach, and they're picking them up and throwing them one back into the ocean.
Yeah.
And somebody came by and said, "What are you doing? You're never gonna be able to save all these starfish." And like, well, I can save this one, and they throw that one in. So it's like I can just help the people I can help, and I'm happy with that. You know, I wish I could help all of them, but I'm limited in time and ability, so I'll help the ones that I can reach and help. And the same thing when I was a recruiter here, right? You can't recruit everybody, but you just help the ones that show up at your doorstep or that you meet at a high school or whatever.
Sheila, I got a great, when I tell people, hey, I'm having so-and-so on the podcast, do you have any questions that you would want me to ask them? I got a great compliment for you in the form of a question.
Oh.
Your recruiting style was described as making the recruit feel like they were the only person in the world you were working with.
Oh.
How do you do that? What does that boil down to? I mean, you were just talking about saving starfish.
Yeah.
And it made me think of that, you know, that starfish in your hand is probably the most precious starfish in the world at the time. Where did you get that ability of caring for the individual while you still have this whole ocean worth that you want to boil, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I think I take each person as they come, right? And each person has value and special uniqueness about them, and like I wanted to find that, and I wanted to like connect with them and like help them understand what joining the military was going to be about, pros and cons. And I always felt like if I was giving them a full picture, then they would be joining for the right reasons. And if they join for the right reasons, you're going to have a happy troop out here, right? And you're going to have good morale. And if what I tell them is something they go, oh, that's not going to fit for me, then I'm like, good, don't join, please don't, right? And so I felt like I was more focused on the person than the numbers, right? Because if I was focused on the numbers, then I would be pressuring you and like, oh, I got to get this person in, and you wouldn't feel like they really cared about you. You'd feel like I only cared about a number. But I really actually truly did care about the person. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't right for them, I would be happy if they didn't join, right? Because it wouldn't be a win for the wing either, right? Because if I trick someone into joining, and then they're really unhappy, then you've got all kinds of new problems. Mm-hmm. You don't want to work with somebody who's unhappy or thinks that recruiter tricked them. And so I think it was really just that being authentic and being focused on what's right for the individual, not I got to get a number today, right?
Yeah, that has translated and infected the culture that we have out here at the wing. I mean, this is a place, it's a good organization. It has 1,200 people in it. Mm. And of those 1,200 people, many of them who are now old folks like me, mm-hmm. They were recruited in by you and made to feel that way on their first steps on their journey out here. How many people do you think you've impacted?
So I believe I've recruited over 600 people into this wing. So half, and of course some left and didn't stay around, which is fine too. Even my own nephew, he served 9 years, and then he said he got a good growing career at a big corporation, and he said, I think I'm going to focus on that. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, you did more than most, right? Mm-hmm. You signed up, you served, you deployed. You have nothing to be embarrassed about by leaving.
Right.
So yeah, well, that's great to hear, and I'm so proud of the people that are out here that I helped recruit, and I'm just like honored that I got to be their recruiter.
Yeah, I mean, even the questions that I got from people that said, "Oh, you're fantastic, you're interviewing her," because they just think back of how you taught people how to treat people when they come into our organization. Is that something you've been able to carry into Cargill?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously my style of recruiting hasn't changed. I'm going to continue to be the same person I am, and so I think that, when I talk to somebody, like I'm working on a program right now helping veterans get into manufacturing. And, I'll call up somebody and they'll say, oh, I'm heading to Pittsburgh. And I'm like, oh, I don't have anything located in Pittsburgh. I can't help you join Cargill. But hey, as long as I got you on the phone, let me tell you a little bit about how to use this tool to find a job in Pittsburgh. Because I want to leave them with something of value that's going to help them in their job search. I don't want to be just like, oh, we can't help you, goodbye, mm-hmm. And so I hope that every interaction is like giving them something that they can use and help them in their job search, even if I can't help them.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, yes, you're working for Cargill, and they've given you this great opportunity to not only help them, but along the way you're meeting a lot of these transitioning veterans, and you're giving them some tools and some skills to help them beyond the company that you're serving. Mm-hmm. Is the company's value or the organization's goals or mission or vision, does that fit?
Ultimately, my goal is to get people in the pipeline, but I think with the military veterans, especially when you're transitioning, there's so much that you don't know. There was so much that I didn't know when I was going through that transition. So if I take 10 minutes to tell you something extra, like I always call it the bonus round, like, let me give you a little extra information that might help you in your search. 10 minutes, I can afford that and leave that person with a great impression, like, hey, this recruiter couldn't help me, but they gave me some tool that I can use or some information about salary or whatever it might be that helped them understand some area that they had a gap. They might refer their friend to me tomorrow, mm-hmm. right? And the same thing when you're a recruiter here, if you treat everybody with respect and dignity, even if they don't join, they might be like, oh man, my cousin should talk to that recruiter. Oh, my best friend should talk to that recruiter. So you never know where the dividends are going to fall.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said at the beginning, treating people well is the best way to do business, right?
I agree. And then, like I said, I think we're seeing that as a part of our culture out here. Even your nephew, after 9 years out here, chose to leave and take something else on. He's probably one of our best non-paid recruiters out there.
Sure.
If his experience was good and he was treated with dignity, that pays dividends that we'll never really be able to measure.
Right.
Which is a great tool. So life has changed since you were a recruiter out here. Now we have social media, and recruiting is completely different. What challenges did you really face as a recruiter before the social media thing? Recruiting was completely different back then. How did you go about getting an average lead, and how has that made you better now?
You know, because I worked for the Army Guard as a recruiter and in the Air Guard as a recruiter, I got to see both sides of the fence, right? And so the Army Guard really was more about canvassing, you know, cold calling and going to your schools every month and seeing a kid in the mall and stopping him, whatever it took, right, to hit your numbers. In the Air Guard, just because, you know, we're lucky, people want to serve in the military, hopefully they gravitate to the Air Force. So it was a little bit like fishing out of a bucket to work here. So I don't know if, what were the challenges? I think one of the biggest challenges was, you know, the diversity piece back then. And I know that we made huge strides in women hiring here at the Wing. I know when I was here, our numbers were incredible, and I had a female recruiting team when I left. That helps, I think. And also having diverse, you know, it's kind of like you have to see it to be it, right? And so I know that you have a diverse recruiting team now, and I think that's important. But we were just kind of getting our feet wet and like doing the outreach. So we did a lot of summertime activities because we go to every festival and carnival in the city. So I think one of the personal challenges was it took up all your time in the summer. Like every weekend we had to go to an event. Whereas in the Army Guard, they had 100 plus recruiters. They may only have to do one a month or one a summer. But on my poor team, we were doing something almost every weekend. So that was a big challenge.
And you were still fishing out of a bucket.
Yeah. We didn't really need to go to those events to get the numbers, but we needed to go to those events to increase diversity. So it was important, but it was very challenging personally as a recruiter to have to give up all your weekends.
Right. Because the goal wasn't to get the numbers in the door. The goal was to change the way our force looked.
Yeah.
Why is changing the way our force looks important?
Well, I think you know, we're a state organization. We want to reflect the demographics of the state. And I think that, you know, even in corporate America, having a diverse team brings diverse ideas. And so they have research that shows that a diverse team is more successful. And so I think, you know, obviously that's important in the military too, to be the most successful. And I also think that even though the Wing is kind of a legacy organization where a lot of people's kids and nephews and nieces and sons and daughters and granddaughters join the Guard, we also need to bring in those families that never have any history of military service, because they have the same rights to the benefits, you know, the educational benefits. It's a leg up for a lot of people that are, you know, at that level where they don't have the family resources to pay for college. And so I think it's the right thing to do, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
We've just passed we're about the time of the difficulty we had last summer out here, where suddenly the entire military was mobilized and sent to downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And I've used the phrase, we brought our airmen and our soldiers in, and their boots were on one side of the line, but their heart might have been on the other. 500 people live in the Twin Cities area that serve in the National Guard.
Yeah. I was thinking about you guys
Yeah,
during that whole time last summer.
it was hard. And so when you talk about having a diverse force and why that is important, I couldn't think of a better articulation of why it's important than those challenging days that we had last summer. When you were in your military career, did you ever think that that was a purpose of our National Guard?
To do like civil unrest? I think when I would talk to recruits, I would talk about the legacy of the Guard and that we started in 1666, so we outdate the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's interesting is that in 350 plus years, the Guard is still relevant, but our missions change, right? And so that's okay. It is difficult when it is a situation where the society is split, but I think that when I saw the Guard come in and things settled down and they stopped burning the city, that was a good thing. And so sometimes you do have to utilize the Guard for those types of events for the safety and security of all citizens. So I was, glad, thankful that we had a Guard to call up at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I've been talking with Sheila Jessen, published author, retired spy, and current military sorcerer for Cargill. We're going to take a break and hear from one of our newest recruiters here at the Wing, and then we'll be right back. Stick around.
Hey, you guys, this is Staff Sergeant Gallucci with the 133rd Airlift Wing Recruiting Office, the new recruiter over here. I was just trying to introduce myself to you guys and talk about some rewarding careers we have for any family or friends you may know that are looking to enlist over here. We have aircraft maintenance, aircraft fuel systems, and plenty of other rewarding careers with very nice bonuses. If you guys have any questions or would like to contact me, you can get me at 612-713-2035. 612-713-2035. I look forward to hearing from you.
Welcome back. I've been talking with Sheila Jessen, one of our distinguished retirees here from the 133rd Air Wing, and we've been talking a lot about recruiting and bringing new members into a career, whether it's with Cargill Corporation, where she is a military sorcerer, or into the military and talking about people's opportunities that they're given when joining the military service. I have been told, Sheila, that you are not a morning person. Is that true?
That's true.
So how do you get up in the morning and get yourself motivated? After a career in the military where it's like we do more before 4 o'clock in the morning, that great commercial from the Army, how did you motivate yourself to get up in the morning and do when you're just not a morning person? Or was it just, I just have gotten sick of waking up in the morning and now I'm declaring it, I'm not a morning person now.
You know what's funny, Mark, is that when I was a kid in middle school, I was a paper girl.
You delivered papers?
I delivered newspapers before school.
Oof.
For like 4 years. So like from middle school and then a little bit into high school. And so I always say that I used up all my early mornings when I was in school. So I can do it. And, of course, in the military, when I was on active duty, it's just you have a schedule and you meet that schedule, no big deal. You're used to it, basic training and onward. When I joined the Army Guard, the funniest thing was I didn't know what time that they would make me start, but I'm like, it's the Army, so it's probably like, dark 30, right? And so, but I didn't want to ask because I didn't want them to think that was a consideration. And then when I got hired and they said, okay, well, what time should I come in? And they said, well, whenever you want. And I'm like, yes.
And this was the Army.
Yeah. And the reason why is that recruiting, you can't call kids at 7 o'clock in the morning, right?
Of course.
And so really you kind of start a little bit later. I don't know what your recruiters do today, but I kind of like, I'll come in at like 8:30, 9, and then I'll work till 5:30, 6 or later. Sometimes, like doing late. Sometimes the kids can come after school and you're doing a lot of paperwork and everybody else on the base is long gone at 4 o'clock and you're still there doing paperwork or meeting people. And so it was kind of like adjusting your schedule for the audience instead of like meeting a military punch clock. So actually recruiting was a good job for me, for my non-morning person.
So you could capitalize on your non-morning person.
It worked perfectly. It was a perfect match.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so I think that's fine. And now that we're doing COVID, I've been working from home since last March, and I'm still working from home, so I don't have to like get up extra early to get dressed and go somewhere. And so it's working out good right now too.
It is kind of nice. I took the opportunity during our year this past year and tried to do this type of job, which is very people-centric, from home. And I took one day where I teleworked and set up the office and took took digital meetings, and as an old person out here to try and do that, I learned a lot about just being self-motivated. What did you learn transitioning from a place where you have to be at work and be seen at work to that telework, work from home? What did you learn about yourself during that process?
I think it was a pretty easy transition for me. I think I was, more fearful about the pandemic than I was I'm so thankful that I had the ability to work from home. So any inconveniences or different ways of learning, different ways of working was fine. My job is primarily talking to people on the phone all over the country, and so I don't really need to be sitting in an office at the corporation to do that job. You do miss out on the teamwork aspect and getting to see your coworkers in person, but I have members on my team who live in California who I've never even met. And so we work together very well. So I think that the pandemic has allowed corporations to realize that there's different ways of doing work. And if you don't need somebody to be in the office, maybe they don't need to even move to Minnesota. And so it also allows for maybe more diversity and inclusion in your hiring practices, because a lot of people don't want to move to Minnesota, right? And so now you can recruit somebody from Atlanta and say, just stay there. And so I think there's some wins in this whole pandemic thing, and I think that it is changing the way work is thought about now. So I think it's, even though it's tragic, there is some silver linings in the way businesses do work now in the future.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I'm thinking back to your time as a linguist, sitting at Eielson Air Force Base, which is in Fairbanks, Alaska, which, if you don't know Alaska, that's the cold part. And now that kind of work where you weren't on the plane and you were listening in a box after they got back, that probably could have been done in Atlanta.
I think it might be
or California.
I think it is being done that way now.
It just makes better sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Amazing. Things have come so far when it comes to the way corporate structure is made up and people are able to work from different places, even in the military. Now we're seeing, I just spoke to a young man yesterday who's working in communications, and he's in the military, and it's a telework schedule.
Wow.
And to me, that just seems so weird. I've always been in a have to be here kind of job, whether it was, as a firefighter, you can't telework firefighting and you can't telework security or police, law enforcement. But so much of what we do in the military is changing. Okay, so usually in the second portion, we shift gears a little bit and have a little bit of fun, talk about people not being a morning person, and that usually works. So let's do some quick questions.
Okay.
These are short answers, not a lot of thought given. Just a quick one-word answer. You ready?
I'm ready.
Favorite 80s hair band?
Queen.
Most unique plant in your garden?
Angel's trumpet.
Best thing about living in Germany?
The beer.
Best thing about living in America?
Freedom.
Corn or soybeans?
Corn.
Movie that made you cry?
Oh, God. I can't think. All of them. I can't think of one.
Okay. You cry at all of them?
Probably.
Yeah, we're both emotional people. I think that's fair. Okay. Tell me about the most unique plant in your garden again.
Angel's trumpet.
Why?
So some people out here know that I had brain surgery, and that plant caused me to discover that I had a brain aneurysm. So that's a whole nother story. But because of that, I grow that plant every year.
It's poisonous, right?
It's poisonous, yeah.
Tell me how that plant saved your life.
So I used to work in a greenhouse part-time, and I always grew, I have all the unique, interesting, cool plants. And this one, gosh, it's kind of a long story. How can I shorten it? Somehow, when I was plucking the dead flowers off the plant, I got the juice of the plant in my eye when I was mowing my lawn, because it was a really hot day in August. I was working in the garden, and I had to go out to the state fair that day. And when I went inside to put my contacts in, I saw one of my eyes was dilated, and I was like, whoa, that's weird. So I called the VA, and they said, you should probably come in right away. It's like kind of an emergency situation when one eye is dilated and the other one isn't. But I didn't know that the plant had done it. So I went in, they did some tests and CAT scan, and I said, I did touch this poisonous plant. So they looked it up. It turns out that plant has a toxin that paralyzes the smooth muscle of your eye. So they're like, you're fine. Just a temporary situation. It'll go away in a couple days. Go home. You're fine. I was like, whew, good, So the next morning I got a phone call, a voicemail, and it said, yeah, we got your CAT scan results back, and you have a brain aneurysm. And I was like, what? And it was the VA, so they're super cash, and they're like, hey, call us next week, because it was a Labor Day weekend. They said, call in on Tuesday and schedule yourself for an MRI. I'm like, okay, it must not be too serious. So I get the MRI. They say you have a brain aneurysm. And so Doc Hamler got involved, helped me find a really great brain surgeon. And so a couple months later, I was having brain surgery. But if that wasn't for that plant, I never would have known. I was walking around with a ticking time bomb in my head. So that plant saved my life. And the name of that plant is Angel's Trumpet. And it's just like, it kind of gives you chills to think about that plant gave me the alert that I had a serious problem.
I was just thinking about this angel on your shoulder blowing a trumpet in your ear. Hey.
So, and I mean, I have to say, the wing and the air guard was so gracious to me during that time. I was out for 5 months, and the general at the time, General Casalter, sent me a letter saying, Sheila, just get better. Don't worry. We got you. And so I had the time to heal and not be worried about my job or getting back quickly. So I was so grateful and so thankful for how I was treated during that time. So thank you to the wing.
Mm-hmm. We like to say we take good care of people, and we like to say that the Guard is family.
And I felt it for sure.
It's powerful that you did. Now that you've been in corporate, how are they doing?
I think they're pretty good. Every company is probably different, so I can't really speak for the whole corporate world. I think the bottom line is when people get laid off or get terminated or they restructure or whatever, the corporation is going to do what's best for the corporation. So it's a little bit different, right? You have to realize that they're not going to take care of you the same way that the Guard took care of you, but at the same time, you're also a free agent, and you can go find another job anytime you want. So it's a two-sided coin. So it's different.
Yeah.
But I think companies have really good benefits and good if something like this were to have happened to me at the corporation, I'm sure I would have had short-term disability and things like that would have kicked in and taken care of me too. I felt like I was lucky that it happened when I was in the Air Guard though, because I felt really blessed.
This place does have. Hate to trumpet our own horn here, but it does have, that's part of the culture. It's also part of the structure, where we do want to take good care of the people, because we know there are days where we call on people to do awful and terrible things, and if we don't take care of them on the front end, it can go very wrong, and it's good to be able to rely on the people that you serve most closest with and have that type of culture.
And they supported me on Carrying Bridge. I remember I used to get messages from everybody, and somebody from finance brought me cookies, and actually they brought them to the recruiting office, and the recruiters ate them all, so she had to make them again.
You've got to be kidding. No. I take back everything I said about taking it. They ate all your cookies.
It's a funny story, but anyway. But everybody was so caring, and it was it made the worst thing that had ever happened to me not be so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story about Angel's Trumpet. I was hoping that you would get into it, because I had a great conversation with another one of your close people that you used to work with out here, and it wasn't sure if you were willing to share that story.
Yeah.
So
and thanks Doc Hamler too, because I may not have had such a good surgical outcome if I hadn't he hadn't lined me up with the best brain surgeon in town. So that was another blessing that came from the Guard too.
Yeah, we work with some really amazing people, and for those folks that aren't familiar, Doc Hamler, who you're speaking of, used to be a part of our organization out here. He's also very well established in the civilian sector in medicine.
Yeah.
So knows.
He's a cranial surgeon on the outside at
Yeah.
that time, so he knew all the brain surgeons in town. So he found the right one for me.
Certainly
Yeah.
a very, very smart and well-networked doctor,
Yes.
which is great. He was also a groundbreaking individual out here, first African-American general officer that we had in the state of Minnesota. So I'm getting to that. You got a degree from the University of Maryland Global Campus back in 1989, before online learning. How did you do that?
So when I was stationed in Berlin, I had a supervisor who really wanted to get all of his troops educated. So every semester he'd bring the class list in. So University of Maryland had classes overseas, and they were nighttime classes for adult soldiers and airmen. And so I was like, I was having too much fun. I was in my 20s and I was on active duty and I was just having a good old time. And but he would be like, come on, what class are you going to take? So I'm like, I'll just appease this guy and I'll sign up for a class or two. And then I found out, I kind of like this. So he got me hooked. Like, I don't know if I would have gotten my degree if this sergeant hadn't encouraged me nonstop to take a class. And so then I was able to get my education almost completed before I got out of the active duty, because I was taking classes at night and I was having to go TDY, so you'd have to make arrangements with the professors, like, hey, I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks and I'm going to miss this test or whatever. So we were able to work around it. They were serving the military population, so they were pretty flexible. But yeah, it was I was going to school 4 nights a week, sometimes Saturdays too, for 2 years straight to get it done. So it was a sacrifice, but I think it's good to make those sacrifices when you're young, because then you're going to benefit from it later. So I'm glad that I knocked it out of the park and got it done.
Cuts into your German beer drinking time.
It did, yeah. I had to get serious and study. Yeah.
Your degree is in Russian?
Russian.
And so they had courses in Russian that you could take there at campus with a live professor?
So yes, I did have a Russian professor there. She was an amazing lady. She was hired. She was an American employee at Spandau Prison, where Hess was still alive, and so they had a Russian, German, French, and English translator there. So she was the American translator, and she spoke fluent. So she was like the English to Russian translator. Her Russian was impeccable. I mean, just amazing. And then the Russian interpreter at that school, or at that prison, they were these old men. And every time she'd make a mistake, they'd say, oh, you said that word wrong. Oh, you didn't use that word right. So they were little did they know, but even though they were picking on her, they were fine-tuning her. So her Russian was getting better and better as she worked there. And so she was my professor over there. So one of the things that she made us do in our course was she made us study Shakespeare in Russian. And apparently during the Soviet era, the best literary writers were too afraid to write their own works because it was dangerous. So they were translating a lot of the great works of English and other languages. And so she said that the Russian Shakespeare was even better than the English Shakespeare.
Interesting. That thought that you cannot write down your own literary work because it was dangerous.
It's a sad situation, right?
Yeah. For 60%, for almost 90% of the people that are serving in the military right now, that's a foreign concept.
Yeah.
And yet you were there and had to kind of feel that. When I asked you what's the best thing about living in America, you said freedom. That's one of the freedom of speech piece is one of the big things that was just missing from their culture back then.
Yeah.
What other things did you
we
pick up?
take it for granted, right? We don't even think about it, but it's so important.
Yeah. And it's so much of the world that has a free, fair, just society takes it for granted. And yet people that had to suffer through that time in their life, they just don't. And you had the opportunity to almost learn one-on-one from somebody that had experienced that. But you got your degree from Maryland Global Campus. Another person who also got their degree. See here, I'll work my way backwards. You graduated from the University of Maryland Global Campus, another groundbreaking woman in the military. her name was Marcelette Harris. She was the first female aircraft maintenance officer in the Air Force.
Oh my gosh.
I know. She graduated from your university.
Huh.
She was also one of the first women to command the Air Force Academy, first female African-American general officer in the United States Air Force, and at her retirement was the highest female officer in the Department of Defense. Highest female African-American woman in the Department of Defense. So pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah.
One of the cool things that she did during her career was she was the White House social aide during the Carter administration. And it was at the height of the Cold War, obviously. So during social engagements with the Russians, instead of having a shot of vodka, did you know that President Carter preferred to have a shot of white wine instead?
No.
So they switched
Yeah.
it. Probably wise diplomacy too.
Mm-hmm.
So let's imagine you and General Harris are sitting together with either a shot of vodka or white wine. Which one would you drink?
If I was going to do a shot, I'd do a shot of vodka.
Okay. I'd probably do the white wine, actually.
When I was in Russian school,
Yeah.
our teachers were, at the military schools, our teachers were Russians. So
Yeah.
when I went through in 1980, 81, they were all like old grandparents age.
Yeah.
And they would invite you to their house. So the first time it happened, this teacher, Alla, invited me and my boyfriend to her house for dinner. And I was 18, like small town, and she said, "Do you mind if we have vodka with our meal?" And I was like, "I guess not." Like, I didn't want to argue or say no. And so they had shots, like big shots of vodka, and you didn't just sip it. You chugged it down, and then she'd fill them up again. Then we'd have another one. So by, the time you were done with your appetizer, you were toasted.
Oh my.
But the Russian got a lot better, because then you were uninhibited to speak your Russian better. So it was a fun night, but it was after the event night was over, my boyfriend said to me, "I can't believe you drank all those shots of vodka." I'm like, "Yeah, I can't believe it either."
Oh
but
my goodness.
that's the culture. That's what Russians do. They love their vodka, and they have a, you don't leave a half drunken bottle of vodka. You drink the whole thing.
Oh my.
So
That makes for a tough now I know why you're not a morning person,
No.
Sheila. So you and General Harris are sitting around and you're talking about groundbreaking people in the military that have transitioned into the workforce, because eventually she transitioned into the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
What are the top 5 or 6 things you guys, and now granted you're taking shots of vodka and white wine, so what are the top 5 or 6 things you think you guys would come up with when it comes to that big transition, especially for women moving into a life on the outside of military service?
Well, I'm sure that her and I will have different stories and different notes to compare, but I think some of the things that I see is, as a woman veteran, we're kind of invisible. And there's a campaign, "I'm Not Invisible." Have you seen that? The VA has been doing this
I have not.
campaign. And, I've experienced it many times where and it's really frustrating. Like, I'll be at the VA hospital. I'm a disabled veteran now, and I get my care there. And I'll be sitting way in the bowels of the building, waiting to see a doctor in the waiting room. So I'm not just in the lobby. I'm way in by the doctor, entrance. And I'll have another veteran look at me and say, "Oh, are you a medical sales rep?" And I'm like, why not just assume that I'm a veteran instead of thinking that I could be? This woman could certainly not be a veteran. She must be a spouse or a medical sales rep. I've had the guards at the VA stop my car, and because I was trying to park in the parking ramp one time, and the guard stopped me and said, "Are you an employee?" And I said, "No, I'm a veteran. I have a women's veteran license plate on my car," for crying out loud. But it's just that it sounds funny, but it's actually really painful when that happens, because it's just because I'm not an old man with a hat on, I'm still a veteran, but nobody sees you as that, right? And so that's a big challenge, is do employers see you as a veteran, or the value that you bring as a veteran? Even your own family, do they understand what it means to be a female veteran? And so it is definitely challenging to be seen be invisible. So trying to bring more awareness to that. And I think that because society thinks of a veteran as basically a man, when you think in your head, what is a veteran? What pops in your head is a picture of a guy. That women have a hard time seeing themselves as a veteran, even going and getting the services. Like at the VA, they say that not enough women are coming there to get their services because they don't think of themselves as veterans, because they're like, oh, I'm not a guy, and I didn't do combat, so therefore I didn't earn it or something. So that's one of the challenges that women veterans are facing.
That's 1 out of 5.
Yeah. I'd say owning what you've done, right? Owning your accomplishments. You know, a lot of times I see women veterans applying too low, like I did, for administrative assistant jobs instead of applying for a operations supervisor at a manufacturing plant or something like that. There's a person in my company who started out, she was an E9 when she got out, and she started out as a HR person, but she was probably like, I don't know how much she was making, but let's just say she was making 40 or 50,000 as an HR person. But then eventually they hired her as a plant manager. They took a chance because they really could see her leadership capabilities. But so it's like, do we undervalue ourselves? Do the companies undervalue us? Or like, you know, how do we get where we need to be and not be underemployed? And I think men face underemployment, but maybe women even more so, because when people look at us, they don't see a seasoned veteran, right? And so they don't think of us that way. I think about the military gives us leadership training at every level, right? Airmen's leadership school and NCO leadership school and senior NCO academy or whatever. In the civilian world, what do they get when they move up to the next level of supervision? They might get an hour on how to like fill out the paperwork on supervising people, but they don't get any kind of the leadership training that we get. So it's kind of our superpower, but we don't know how to express that, and we don't know how to get civilians to understand the value that brings to them.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because one of the big questions that I have here, and maybe this comes down to number 3 in your list of things that you and General Harris would come up with, how does a military veteran say, I am a good leader on a resume or on a job application? How do they actually say those words?
Well, I think part of it is education, right? So we need to figure out the new culture that we're entering. And so if a hiring manager asks you, what is your leadership style? Well, unless you know how civilians label leadership styles, you may not know how to answer that question, right? So, understanding the language that they're going to use, or studying civilian leadership styles, and then being able to say, oh, that one describes me, that's helpful, right? That's a good way to approach it. So I think, there's a former Army Guard guy, Eric Alness. He was a 06 over in the Army Guard side.
Yep.
He joined Cargill, and he used to say, you should approach your transition the same way you'd approach a deployment. The same amount of effort and care into preparing for that transition, because when you're heading over to Afghanistan, you're going to have to learn some language, get ready for the culture, do a lot of extra training. And so if you think I'm just going to float on out of here and then not prepare myself and then I'm just going to land a job, it's like you're going to get what you put into it, right? And so I talk a lot about building new muscles. So you shouldn't just wait until the day before you get out, like, oh, maybe I should start like spiffing up my resume. It's like, no, you should start 2 years ahead of time networking and preparing and learning how the process works, so that when you get to that end point, you're ready to make that successful transition. It'll be smoother.
Do you think that, okay, you've told 2 stories now about 2 guys that transitioned. One was looking for a different work-life balance than the military and took that job as a truck driver and happy as a clam, because now they have that a better sense of work-life balance. The other said prepare like it's a deployment. And do you think that veterans should look up when they transition out of the military, look across for like the same status level job, or like you've said, so many just look down and take a different level job that isn't necessarily fitting their capabilities, but then eventually that company sees them and hires them as a plant manager. What's the right approach?
I think the first step that a lot of people skip is, what do I want to be? What do I want to do? taking that time for introspection, because sometimes they're just like, I need a job, and they start applying for jobs. And then they get a job and they're like, I don't like this. It's not a good fit. And so I think taking that extra time to like think about who do you want to be. It's a great opportunity to reinvent yourself. Maybe you've been in logistics your whole military career, but you don't like it. Well, why would you want to go do that again, right? And so thinking about what will make you happy, how do you want to spend the next 10 or 20 years of your life, and like maybe you need to take a 90-degree turn and do something different. Or maybe you really like what you're doing and you want to continue it, and like, I need to network and find out who's doing that in the civilian world and start figuring that out. But I think unless you take that little bit of extra time to like do some introspection, you're going to be just flailing around trying to like just get a job that pays you some money, but you're not really going to be fulfilled in it or find your niche, right?
So again, take some time and put some work into what you're going to do on the next step. Are you happy?
Am I happy? I'm very happy. Yeah, I feel like I'm blessed to be in the position I'm at. I worked for a company. I think when I was making my transition, when I was doing that introspection, I was like, okay, I want to find a company that has a good mission, right? Because I love the mission out here, right? And when I talk to young people, I could tell them about the mission. Our mission is a C-130 unit. We do aeromedical evacuation. We do humanitarian stuff. We do troop transport and equipment transport. We're not part of the fighting game, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's just not our role here. And that was a little bit of an easier sell with the parents, right? And I think that when I found Cargill, their mission is to help feed the world in an environmentally sustainable way. And then I wanted to find a company, which I really loved. I'm kind of a tree hugger. And then my other thing was I wanted to find a company with good values, because I didn't want to be representing a company that was doing shady business, right? Because I wanted to be not working for a company that I wake up in the news or some news story about something bad that they did, right?
Your story about the glass table just kind of made me think of that. Nothing under the table.
Yes. Right? And so I found like a really happy home at Cargill because the values and the mission line up with my values and my mission. And so that was important to me, right? So I think that me being clear that I wouldn't want to work for a company that didn't align with those two things helped me guide me in my job search.
I'm glad you're happy.
Yeah, thank you.
Sheila, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast with me and talk about, we have hours that we could continue going in here, but unfortunately I have a time limit on my podcasts here. But the heart and the soul and the values that you brought to your job out here, like I've said, over half our wing has been impacted by you. And thanks for making such a good impact on our wing and continuing that impact with veterans that you're working with now, especially in your civilian career. So I appreciate you being on the pod with me.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Hey, I hope that you join me again on another fascinating podcast for our next go-round. And until then, take care.